I'm really happy to introduce John Duignan. Is it?
Duignan.
Duignan.
That's how I pronounce it.
It actually turns out I know John personally. We worked on the tutorial group study sessions in UCC. He certainly seemed nice then. So as opposed to me going through kind of his personal story, I think I'll leave you off because that's kind of the subject of your talk. Yeah. So without further ado, John Duignan.
I like these things very formal, so kind of what I've done here, kind of prepared a framework, if you like, that will serve for a basis for discussion, questions, whatever else. So I'll read forward in a formal fashion for a little bit, and then we'll go from there. All right. Right. So first of all, thanks to Aaron for the invitation to address ye this afternoon. It came as a surprise to discover that we attended the same Lit series during our time in UCC. So we are now, in fact, UCC alumni. Alumna is, it seems, actually just a very posh word for unemployed graduate. Now, the aspect of such forums that I find most stimulating is that of discussion and interaction on the presented subject matter. Now, this for me is at least in part a reaction against the didactic nature of the Scientology method that works intensively to break down the subject's critical participation in the discussion of essential doctrine and dogma. Now, the Scientology precepts are learned as absolute truths, often verbatim. Now, they must be applied exactly. Sorry, I'm just going to put on my reading glasses, old age. The typical Scientologist is utterly, I'm sorry, I'll reread that. So the Scientology precepts are learned as absolute truths, often verbatim. They must be applied exactly. The typical Scientologist is utterly passive in this sense. I'll cover more on this in a bit. Now, for the sake of cultural relatives among us, I want to underline the point that the Scientology culture is the exact antithesis of the secular humanistic approach to pedagogy and andragogy that we find at the Cork Humanities as practicing third-level education and beyond. Now, it is thus my aim to minimize the presentation of my experience and my subsequent assimilation and rationalization of what happened to me during the years I spent in its thrall, and instead simply present, sorry, I'm repeating myself here, but the framework upon which we can form a discussion. It is in this light that I have focused on one aspect of the Scientology system, that of the manipulation of the subject's memory. Scientology disingenuously conflates empirical science with mysticism. They do this to quite some effect in the field of memory. In the course of my time in the cult, I distinctly recalled sitting atop an asteroid somewhere in deep space, looking down at the hull of a Zeppelin-shaped interstellar craft butted up against the lower half of my lonely perch. As I sat there, I knew that all of the crew were dead, thanks to the efforts of a monstrous alien that had somehow stored away in the craft. I realized that my body was in fact dead, and that I was at that point my disembodied self, grieving the terrible loss of my crew and the mission that we embarked upon. I dated the incident, as the subject is required to do, to some 45 million Earth years prior. The recalled event acted to deepen the commitment that I had to Hubbard to the point of fanaticism. Now, what occurred in fact was a thin membrane that demarks the line between the conceptualization of what comprises reality and fantasy has been successfully breached by the insidiously constructed insanity machine that best describes the Scientology system. Any reading of accounts from Scientologists that progress to and beyond the state of clear, that's in the Scientology system, will reveal that past life recalls such as mine are not just commonplace, but are essential to that level of indoctrination. The incident that I just recounted took place in 1987, while I was undergoing an intensive and lengthy Scientology process called the grades. Now, these comprised one-on-one sessions with an auditor, This is a person trained to read an electrocyclometer to which the subject is hooked and to interrogate based on the readings what that meter indicates. These sessions are exhaustive. They can go on for as much as 6 hours straight. They are designed to bring thoughts and memories to the fore. They are profoundly invasive. When first encountering incidents of the past life variety, they often function to cause a meter reaction called a floating needle. Whenever such a reaction occurs, the session must be ended, which is always a relief, and the experience must be verified by a third party on a separate meter. The purpose of this is to validate the memory, to make it real enough. Memory and sense of place and time are, unfortunately, malleable in the extreme. Professor of neurology at New York University School of Medicine, Oliver Sacks, opens an article on this topic rather poetically. We now know that memories are not fixed or frozen, like Proust jars or preserves in a larder, but are transformed, disassembled, reassembled, and recategorized with every act of recollection. The creation of false memories in the context of the Scientology world is, and has always been, actively encouraged. This is a fundamental component in the design of a Scientology machine. Through this mechanism, a sense of credibility can be ascribed to the subject. It must be true if I can recall it. I can argue without equivocation that all of us who formally adhered to the thought system were, if not utterly ignorant, then at least seriously deficient in our comprehension of evidence-based research in the field of psychology. We were thus quintessentially not placed, and indeed reluctant, to question such an exciting prospect, as was posited by Hubbard. With this much vaunted Hubbardian breakthrough, we could explore the very history of humankind, not as passive students, but as full-blown actors in the great dramas and struggles of our recent and distant pasts. Had I been passionate about music back then, I'm sure I would have recalled studying under Mozart or Chopin. There are many present and former Scientologists who recall being Alexander the Great, Dido of Carthage, or even Jesus of Nazareth. Some have even recounted having been Adolf Hitler. As a side note, upon reflection, it now seems very likely that not very long before I had recovered that asteroid moment from the depths of my infinite experience, that I had seen the second installment of the Ridley Scott trilogy, Aliens. The film came out in the UK in August 1986. It is nigh on impossible to disprove a memory. Memories are constructed from objective, externally derived experience and subjective rationalization of environmental stimulus. That Hubbard worked out how to manipulate the credulous in this way cannot be considered revolutionary or even surprising. Religious cults have been doing this for as long as humans have been functioning as symbiotically supportive pairs. The logical shutdown required of a Catholic to consume the flesh and blood of Christ is a silent example of the type. The Hubbard paradigm, using his skills as a sci-fi writer, simply made this ancient mystical religious concept sexy. All Scientology inductees experienced throughout the course of their early indoctrination the implicit emphasis that the doctrine placed on past life, the implicit emphasis that the doctrine placed on the past life experience. This level of indoctrination was so prevalent, so intrinsic, and so alluring, and yet never explicitly stated, that it bypassed one's critical analysis filters. The hints that were dropped as to the existence of past lives and implications that these could, through Scientology, be explored, served to pique the credulous neophyte's curiosity. Thus, by the time they were sitting down for the first big sales interview, they were well primed to put cash on the table for this. It could be argued that the softening up process prepares the subject for the fabrication of past life memories. Now, these past life memories may be analogous to the emotional contract described as the suspension of disbelief that one enters into when sitting down to watch a movie. Now, to move from the general to the specific, I might mention the very moment that I was doing my first tour of the bookstore in the Scientology mission of Stuttgart in southern Germany. Now, my eyes lighted upon such books as How You Live Before This Life and Mission into Time. In practically every tape lecture I listened to from a course called The Student Hat onwards, Hubbard never missed an opportunity to delve deeply into his previous incarnations, be it that of a Hessian mercenary in the American War of Independence, or as a Maccabean race car driver in a galactic confederacy that included Earth as a prison planet. Social pressure also played a huge role in encouraging, if not subtly demanding, that one remember former past lifetimes. Ideally, that would include a prior stint in the cult during its formative years in the 1950s and 60s, or perhaps in some far distant galaxy fighting alongside Hubbard against the plethora of interstellar villains. To reach the exalted state of clear, one had little option but to remember his past incarnations. And more disturbingly, emotional pressure from children as young as 8, remembering and being encouraged to remember having been at St. Hill or the flagship Apollo long before they were conceived. Now, I'm not at all surprised that I discovered clear memories of walking the St. Hill grounds in some faded black and white or sepia past within the first few months of my arrival there. But I am deeply saddened by the loss of the life that could have been were it not for my youthful naivety and incredulity. Now, in closing this part of the proceedings, I want to provide a concrete example of how this thought framework can impact on how a Scientologist conducts himself in the real world. The practice of Scientology is not supposed to be merely an esoteric belief, but rather a worldview that pervades every facet of the person's life. I'm picking on Tom Cruise here. I have little or no sympathy for the guy. He set himself up as Scientology's frontman. He went out and evangelized for the cult at every opportunity. What did he expect? That the world would roll over like a puppy for its belly to be tickled? Surprise, surprise. He hit a wall of criticism and derision. The real world does not like Scientology. People in the real world think and critically evaluate. This came as a shock to him. The now famous Tom Cruise meltdown describes the stop-frame train wreck of what had been an enviable, if not unassailable, celebrity public profile. Who can forget his insistence that Brooke Shields should not be taking antidepressants, as there is no chemical basis for such things as postpartum depression? Or what his aggressive assertion to Matt Lauer, I know history of psychiatry and you don't, that he knew better for what was good for Brooke than she or her doctor could possibly know. Then there was a counter-jumping incident in the Oprah Winfrey show. Actually, it could be argued that it was his inflated ego living in that rarefied and costed celebrity world that had been created around him that was, is, and will continue to be his stumbling block. That swollen balloon has been so seductively stroked and so carefully manipulated by his masters in the weird and distorted Scientology land that he felt he could dump the woman that made him. Not Nicole Kidman, but his former unassailable publicity agent, Pat Kingsley. Now, he appointed in her place his utterly unqualified nobody of a sister. As they say in the Scientology land, what the fuck? Tom Cruise wanted to be free to promote his one real passion, Scientology. Kingsley would not let him, so he dumped her and persuaded his sister to recall all of her past lifetimes as an agent and manager of movie stars. And then he put her on post. Cruise's Scientology belief tells him that we have lived for millions of lifetimes, and that each of us have thus, in past incarnations, presided over planetary systems, flown spaceships, and even managed the careers of movie stars. This is a fundamental precept within the Scientology system of staff appointments and training. You will find it in the most basic of Scientology on-to-post checklists, on-to-post training checklists. That worked out rather well, didn't it, not Tom? Following are a couple of... Now, I'm just going to close here now with a couple of quotes, right? These are from a very important, I suppose, fundamental policy letter, piece of scripture, whatever you want to call it. Every single Scientologist must study, not once, but every time he embarks upon a course. Every time. So, in the duration of your Scientology career, you might study this, you might read this 1,000 times, right? So, I'm going to read a number of quotes from it, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions from it, okay? So, here's where the first quote begins. If you want to actually, if any of you have ever been brave enough to try and explore anonymous websites and dig up the L1 Hubbard recordings, you can imagine here Hubbard's sleazy, sonorous voice assaulting your ears with the medium of an old reel-to-reel tape deck. We will not speculate here on why this was so or how I came to rise above the bank. We're dealing only in facts, and the above is a fact. The group left to its own devices would not have evolved Scientology, but with wild dramatizations of the bank called New Ideas would have wiped it out. Supporting this is the fact that man has never before evolved a workable mental technology. And emphasizing this is the vicious technology he did evolve. Psychiatry, psychology, surgery, shock treatment, whips, duress, punishments, etc. ad infinitum. When someone enrolls, consider that he or she is joined for the duration of the universe. Never permit an open-minded approach. If they're going to quit, let them quit fast. If they're enrolled, they're aboard. And if they're aboard, they're here in the same terms as the rest of us. Win or die in the attempt. Never let them be half-minded about being Scientologists. The finest organizations in history have been tough, dedicated organizations. Not one bunch of namby-pamby, panty-waist dilettantes have ever made anything. It is a tough universe. The social leader makes it seem mild, but only the tigers survive, and even they have a hard time. We'll survive because we are tough and are dedicated. When we do instruct somebody properly, he becomes more and more tiger. When we instruct half-mindedly and are afraid to offend, scared to enforce, we don't make students into good Scientologists, and that lets everybody down. When Mrs. Fabricate comes to us to be taught, turn that wondering doubt in her eye into a fixed, dedicated glare, and she'll win and we'll all win. Humor her and we all die a little. The proper instruction attitude is, you're here, so you're a Scientologist. Now we're going to make you into an expert auditor no matter what happens. We'd rather... That's, hopefully, you've grasped something about what the subject entails, what happens in it. So, ask me any questions you've got about it, anything you're curious about, anything about... I suppose I'll tell you a tiny little bit of detail there. I got out of the organization, I actually fled the organization in 2006, and got back here in July 2006. I was hunting, I was chased by them. The people outside of my family stands up and carried a line when they realized I'd flown the coop in Birmingham. I had to hide from them. I had to set up a bit of a ruse, making them think that I'd actually gone to Ireland, I'd actually purchased a ticket from the whole bloody lot. So they think I'd gone to Ireland, and I actually went out and I lived with a bunch of very interesting characters on the streets of Birmingham for about 3 weeks until I knew the coast was clear. Now the reason for all that, it might sound a bit weird, right? But they actually would have physically kidnapped me back if they could physically have found me, right? One of the reasons that would have worked, of course, is that I was emotionally, as well as psychologically, very, very, very vulnerable at that point. And it takes, there's a bit of a, it seems that with many people who have escaped, there's a bit of a period there where one recovers his sense of self enough to know that they don't have power over him anymore. And that could be On average, about 3 months to do that, roughly. So I was aware of this because I'm ashamed to admit I participated in such hunts before as a Scientology security person, hunting down people with knowledge. So I knew the whole scoop, if you like, you know. Anyway, so I made good my escape, and then I got back here in 2006. Took quite a few months, I suppose, to get my shit together, you might say. Did some work in employment at UCC then in 2000. Around the time I wrote this book in 2008. I'd written a couple of articles about my experience and posted them on various online newspapers and so on. They got a lot of interest because at that time the Anonymous Network was just kind of raising their heads, and they latched on to what I'd written in a number of articles, and I got thousands of hits, and then I got publishing. That's what the right book. There you go. And that was 2008 then when I started university and just finished that thing, and kind of have been a little bit cautious about doing too much on it since then, mainly because I wanted to get through university. That was important to me. That was part of my normalization process, as you can imagine. I was 25 years in the cult. I was quite naive when I went in, but by God I was naive when I came out and was in there. But that process of normalization, UCC was a very good kind of, I suppose, it's kind of a, what would we call it, kind of a decompression system, a re-socialization system. Let's get back into the world.
And what was the moment of clarity that you had to just make you decide to leave? I mean, after 25 years, you must have had a reason to decide to question and take that decision, because not only is it very difficult to break indoctrination, but it's also socially scary. And you have a lot of incentive to, even if you don't fully accept it, to still stay in just to avoid the hassle.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose there was two, in fact. There were two major points of realization. First of all, I suppose, to put in context, the system of indoctrination works because it's constantly reinforced, right? You know, by people reading stuff like that, Hubbard's insanity every day, and you believe it's true. That's it. Also, of course, the social reinforcement, as you mentioned, out of the group. I've been out in Africa, in Zimbabwe. I was a troubleshooter. I used to fly around the world troubleshooting for in various areas of problems. We had a lot of trouble in Zimbabwe, and I was going down there to sort it out. Which I did, but in the process of that, Mugabe decided I was a South African agent and put me in prison. And got out of that. We had a good contact. We lived in England, Berkeley, who got me out, or got me in his custody, so to speak, right? And then we had a court case, and it was very interesting. And got back to England. You can imagine that kind of shooting me up. Funny enough, on the plane actually, I was in Addis, in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, how do you say it? And it's the main city of Ethiopia.
Is it Addis Ababa?
Sorry, Addis Ababa. That's it. Addis Ababa. And we sort of, I got there, and there was a big stop over there, and there was a guy who was working with the UN, an Irish fellow actually from, I think he was from Kerry. And he was, began talking about famine and the relief work he was doing. And it kind of woke me up and said, hang on a second, there's something else going on in the world besides Scientology. You know, there's other people doing good stuff, you know. And that kind of got me thinking. In other words, the Cork wheel started going. That was in, when was that? About 90. That could have been 1991, 1992. Subconsciously, I'm sure an awful lot of stuff was happening at that point. Later on, a few years later, I found myself in Bournemouth, and I was sorting out another huge problem with Scientology, which was about probably to close down the corporation. They were being sued successfully or they had been sued successfully by a person for, I think they were sued for 5 million, and not so much the money, but the political fallout and the media fallout would have been massive because it would have been publicised thing, and it was a big, big, big case. And I was sent down there to buy the incident off. In other words, I won't go into the Scientology finance system, but it's as convoluted as you can imagine, sort of nappy and whatever you want. It's a crazy system. But rather than the multi-billion Church of Scientology giving me a check, going down, finding the person, giving it to the woman, and getting her to disappear, I had to go down and find £1 million and give this woman to make her disappear. So to find £1 million, it took me 6 months, and it took me 6 excruciating months. It's one of the most excruciating months I've ever had in Scientology. I was living on about, sometimes I was living on £5 a week and sleeping on floors, and yet dealing with hundreds of thousands of pounds coming through my hands and putting, this kind of stuff. Anyway, that's as nothing as you can imagine. I came back from that and I was like, no, there's something really, 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 really wrong here. In that, I've been exposed to the internet for the first time. You're not allowed to use internet in Scientology, by the way.
Wow.
You're not allowed, you're rarely allowed to use TV, whatever. Newspaper restricted and so on. But I've been down there for 6 months. I've been living with real people. I've been actually directly interfacing with the real world with very little actual direct contact, I suppose, social contact, I suppose, with the cadre I was involved in Scientology management. When I got back, someone had decided that I had been in touch with the anti-Scientology group. Now, Scientology is a paranoid organisation, as you can imagine. It comes down from Hubbard himself, who's a kind of class paranoia person. Anyway, they decided that I'd obviously been in touch with the enemies of Scientology, and they dragged me into an interrogation session. It took 3 weeks. I was locked in a tower, kept there constantly under armed guard. That's a paranoid idea. And interrogated me intensively, and I just said, fuck this, this is just ridiculous. And I said, that's it, okay, I'm out of here, right? But it wasn't that simple. It took another 5 years to get out of there. Because you're not allowed to do that, basically. Anyone's put on a non-executive, non-profit local post, looking after vehicles and engines and whatever else. And eventually, after, I suppose, a bit of Machiavellian manoeuvring, I was promoted back up to an high executive level and sent up to Birmingham to sort out finances up there. In the process of doing that, I said, okay, I'm going to resort the place out and I'm going to actually find out if Scientology works. Because obviously it's been 25 years, I believed it worked. I was the first time ever critical of it and thinking about it, cogitating about it. But I said, okay, let's give it a chance. I've done 25 years of this. I'm actually going to really, really try Scientology in the real world. See if all those massive blown claims that Hubbard makes are valid. During that year or so, there was a big, what's called a big event down in St. Hill, fundraising event actually, and Tom Cruise was there, and John Duignan was there, and Tom Cruise, that was when he made that black twinkle-like video. And he stood up on stage and was like all the glory. And then the Chairman of the Board of Scientology, guy that's the Supreme Dictator of Scientology, stood up on stage, he was standing next to him on stage, said, this is the greatest Scientologist in the world. There's no person who's stronger, better, more effective, more blah blah, anything, right? I don't think I've 25 years in this job. I've been to prison for these fuckers, I've lived on 5 foot a week, slept on floors with you guys. This is just multi-billionaire star. This multi-billionaire star is the greatest Scientologist. Anyway, that set some more turning. So I got back up to Birmingham and said, okay, let's take this Scientology thing and that's really, really working. So, there's 2005, there was riots in the Roselle's area of Birmingham, right? This was the Muslim and Black Afro-Caribbean community began extremely violent battles, street battles. And the whole, this area near where I was actually living at was on fire. And I said, okay, Scientology got this program called the Volunteer Minister Program. Now, mostly it was promote Scientology, use Scientology stuff. I said, okay, I'm going to go out there as a Scientology volunteer minister on the streets, 48 hours, bam, right? And we'll see what happens, right? So I went out, and I found I was actually going out to myself. And I asked the other comrades, my Scientology comrades, my staff comrades, said, listen guys, it's important, we're Scientology, we're volunteer ministers, this is what we're told we're supposed to do, we're supposed to, change the world, so let's go out and do it. No one did. So, fine, I went up there myself, yep. Scientology yellow jacket on, so I was out there. Had some very interesting encounters, met Caribbean leaders and met Muslim leaders and dodged burning cars, whatever else. It was all terribly interesting. I kind of got back and I said, okay, well, let's take another stage. So I began volunteering in a number of organizations. There's a very effective system that the Home Office in England set up back in the mid-2000s, that's under Tony Blair's government, which involved empowering voluntary organizations and voluntary groups to, if you like, carry out Labour policies to some degree, the positive social policies, right, in places like Birmingham. And so they were quite, and there was a central coordinating body called the BCS, I think it's called. And I said, okay, here's the strategy, right? I'm going to make Scientology from this little fringe group that people think is weird, because I discovered people thought it was weird at that point. And I'm going to make it very acceptable. So I went in and started volunteering in various organizations. Sometimes people knew I was a Scientologist, and a number of them, I made sure they had no idea about anything to do with Scientology whatsoever, right? The ones I wanted them to know, the ones I needed, like youth groups, Muslim youth groups, Kashmiri Muslims. I said, look, we're Scientologists, I'm going to put this stuff here to help guys study, but this stuff here to help them, work better with society and whatever else we had. And in that capacity, I went up and met the local head of education authorities and met MPs and all kinds of stuff on that thing. In other programs, I worked with Aston Villa Football Club. They ran a fantastic program called Playing for Success, which is a really clever program. Takes kids who are doing badly in school, you put them in intensive little fun study groups, with computers and all talk in learning games. You're learning English, learning computer skills, learning mathematics, and it's all done in kind of a games thing. And it's set up in the big Aston Villa grant, stadium rooms. So the kids go, yeah, we're up there doing this stuff, And I worked with them for quite a while, and it was fascinating actually. I must admit, I didn't know Scientology, I never told them anything to Scientology. He said it was, kind of very smart guy who kind of what things that it's important to do. So bang, it down there twice a week, working with the kids. In all of that, I discovered Scientology didn't work. I discovered Scientology has no effect whatsoever. Here I am working with people in the community, and they are just doing the most incredible work. They're intelligent, they're thinking. I had to read quite a bit of sociology in order to try and learn the language. I was appointed to, actually, I got myself onto the DCS board, which was actually deciding what projects it would support. And the aim was that I would actually get on that board and forward the Scientology agenda. Particularly we wanted the government to help us to buy, I think it was a £10 million building, the old Lloyd's Bank building, and use it as a central Church of Scientology. And that was all going very, very well. But in the process of that, I discovered it was a complete con. And that was it. And one day I looked on the internet and I found the most forbidden material, which is the esoteric level called OT3, which you're not allowed to read, you're not allowed to even know about until you've reached that level in Scientology. Republic, Scientology, public paying Scientology that'll set them back a good 45 grand just for that level, as well as your 45 grand or 50% to get up to the prior state clear. So it's a top secret level, obviously. But then I found it online in full original text as written by Hubbard. I used to like science fiction and I've seen Flash Gordon films, and this is a very poor version of Flash Gordon. Set about 45 grand. And I thought this is crazy, and I called my brother and I said, I've got to get this stuff out here. And then that whole process began. Various adventures, landed me a Cork living drug in July 2006.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I picked up a book somewhere, I don't know about second-hand or in the train station, which was, Scientology wasn't mentioned at all, which was full of kind of pseudo-academic stuff.
Yes.
Big words, explanations, number options, explanations at the bottom. And I remember reading it next to my wife in bed one night. It was quarter inch, and it was just like, this is a fraud. But it always surprised me that I think people who pick that up and say, yeah, I like that, there must be pre-programmed, maybe writing for science fiction might explain it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. First of all, you've got to remember that a lot of us who got into Scientology were stupid young fellas, you know? Like guys who back when we were kids, you know, slapped on the head, yeah, you go, you know. People who, so you could probably break into normal categories. Obviously there's people who have a very poor level of education. They don't know how to critically think, right? So they've not been through a decent education, not been through a third level of education, they've not learned to think, they've not learned to, you know, as they read, to think about what the heck this stuff is saying.
To reject authority as a source of knowledge, to reject authority and actually look at the facts themselves.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So you know, people, you know, vulnerable people, often an awful lot of people against Scientology are very, very vulnerable people. I was definitely at the time I've been very vulnerable.
But on the other end, then you have crews that who strikes me as extremely clever, obviously financially successful guy. There's no way he was thinking about that. He must be cynical money maker.
No. I disagree with that. I met Cruz a number of times. I think he's an arrogant prick, to be honest with you. He is a tool of Scientology. Scientology got him when he was this young, slightly confused kid after he'd done his first movie. I think that he'd done that first film.
Sorry, could you speak up?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, so yeah, he got it at the same time as me actually did in '86. Just having done that first film. What's it?
Top Gun. Was it Top Gun?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. That
What?
one.
Cocktail.
Cocktail, yeah, it might have been that. Anyway, he got in that time. He was aggressively recruited, by the way, by Scientology. They said, okay, this guy is vulnerable. They watched a couple of interviews with him. He's a bit confused. Great, let's get him. You know, it's part of the Scientology program. We're going to hit this with people who might be up and coming movie stars or something like that, and then we're going to get them. So they sent up Mimi Rogers to befriend him and had her divorce her husband and befriended him, married him, and got into Scientology.
What Rogers was that?
I think it was Mimi Rogers, yeah. And I think she was an actress in her own right, actually, at the time, yeah. But that was an aggressive recruiting thing. Tom Cruise is a deeply conflicted human being, and he remains so today, in fact, despite what we might see on kind of glitzy stuff. Did you see him on TV, or the openings he did in Dublin for Oblivion and that kind of thing? He's a very, very convincing guy. He's a very angry guy. He's a very aggressive human being. Now, a lot of that is learned behavior, because the top man in Scientology is an absolute psycho. I mean, and he took Cruz completely under his wing and trained him like a dog, if you like. That's literally what happened, trained him like a dog. So, no, again, Cruz would have been typical of the demographic that gets into Scientology, except that he had done a movie and was, already being, a rising star. But he was a very vulnerable, naive person. He had a poor education level. He was dyslexic, probably, dyslexic essentially. But he had difficult comprehending.
It's said that the Hollywood property is owned massively by Scientology.
Yeah, it's kind of, they have a lot of property, an awful lot of property there. I spent a long time.
Is it owned by Cruz? Or is it owned by...
No, Scientology. So Scientology is very, very wealthy in its own right. It didn't necessarily mean Cruz's wealth. It's hugely wealthy. It's got all kinds. I mean, my God, the amount of time they spent, a lot of, I worked in finance quite a lot, and the amount of dodges and leaving they do to avoid tax, to avoid, to shift money to Cayman Islands and all this kind of stuff. A mate of mine, his job used to be to grab the day's takings or half a week's takings in a suitcase in cash, jump on the Concorde and fly over to Europe and get himself down to Luxembourg and Liechtenstein and stash the money there. Scientology is wealthy. This was Hubbard's one real money.
Wasn't that the famous quote, that if you want to make real money, start your own religion?
Actually, yeah, that is the quote. If you want to make $1 million, start a religion, that's Hubbard's quote.
I wasn't sure whether it was a bit like a legend, like you have with many mythical tales, like you have with Theodore Roosevelt and things like that. You have little stories that crop up.
Oh yeah. No, it's true. This has been. I've been obviously I've done an awful lot of digging around since I got out. I was aware of that quote before, actually, because Scientology was constantly trying to fight it. And so in my capacity there as kind of a troubleshooter, I was very, very close. Of course, telling you it's all well, blah, 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 blah. But later on, I've seen corroboration of people who sat with Hubbard in that sci-fi discussion group and said, this writing stuff is not going to make me rich, I'm going to make $1 million, start a religion. And he did. I call myself a cynic now? I'm a lot more cynical than I used to be, but I think pretty much anybody who stands up there as kind of a religious leader, I'm sorry, they know what the game is, and they're playing it. I'm sorry. Hubbard was a real card in that sense. My God, he was top of the pack in terms of the.
Well, look at Mormons. He was a convicted con man for doing the exact same thing.
It's transparent now. What's really interesting, again, this is stuff that fascinates me. I don't have any resolutions, but it does fascinate me. Stand back now, and it's transparent. This is calm. Joseph Smith, give me a break, And then when you start looking at Hubbard, oh my God, what's his name? Bhagwan Ganeshi is another classic.
Sorry, who?
Bhagwan Ganeshi is another one. The Bhagwan movement?
Rajneesh.
Sorry, Rajneesh, yeah. I used to hang out with him. It's all the Buddha nightclub in Stuttgart before I met Scientology. And,
Who's he? Sorry, who's this guy?
He started the group called the Bhagwans, a cult that was really big. It was big time back in the 80s, I think.
Oh yeah, I was getting mixed up with the Beatles God. No,
yeah. No, this is Bhagwan, or Bhagwan. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was a big thing. This was kind of, this fantastic book, by the way. One of the many bits of stuff that I read that made me wake up about Scientology was a book called My Life in Orange, again, the name will come back to me in a minute, the author, fantastically written book about growing up in the background in an Eshu cult. From a little child all the way through. What? Tim Guest. No.
I'm just wondering, I'm going on holidays to Canada in August for 2 weeks. Could you give me advice on how to raise £1 million?
It's not a religion.
You would have to burn your soul. You have to turn into a cinder. You have to have no conscience whatsoever. You'll be able to do that, no problem. It's when we develop, we get the social conscience that we,
Was there no time at all in the early years when you realised you were actually being brainwashed?
Oh God,
None at all?
no.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat the question?
Was there no time in the early years when you realised it was being brainwashed? Does that just not come into it at all?
Put yourself in the shoes of a 14-year-old kid, right? Imagine that. Imagine what you can teach a 14-year-old kid to believe, think, or whatever else. Well, I wasn't a 14-year-old kid, but I was certainly as credulous as a 14-year-old kid. I suppose really, look, a lot of this had to do with my childhood too. Completely disastrous childhood, completely nightmare start to finish really. That doesn't set you up well, you know what I mean? And I guess in some way, I suppose the part of me, the emotional dependency part of me was still stuck. Probably the worst period of that time, probably when I was a 10-year-old child, you know what I mean? So certainly that was acting.
So did you sort of see it as these were people who would look after you?
On some level.
They'd create some sort of family for you and look after you.
It was an escape. It was an escape from dealing with reality to dealing with real life. You know, a kid has been through what I've been through, difficult forming relationships, and not needing parental kind of thing. You know.
You don't think it odd at all when somebody converts to one of the big religions.
I do.
You know, I mean, I do. Yeah, it's not thought odd that somebody would suddenly become Jewish or Catholic or Pentecostal or whatever. We just think they found Jesus or found something.
Yeah.
People will suspend belief.
But generally, they are allowed to think and move easily outside of those religions.
Not really.
It kind of depends
Not
what
really.
you were talking about. There wasn't a lot of thinking done 40 years ago saying...
I mean,
I agree. How can the hierarchical kind of top-down religious structures, you know? There is something that's important for me, and I think it's important actually in terms of legislation, actually in terms of the cult. I tend to be very unequivocal that any of these groupings, in its origins was a fanatical cult, you know what I mean? Okay, now I really do accept on the most level that, okay, some people, a lot of people find a real sense of peace and find tranquility and find a meditative space within that context of the greater world religions. You can sit in the mosque and you can, sort of pray to one Mecca and whatever else, or Catholics can sit there. Even me as I'm not atheist, but back in October, I found myself sitting in a beautiful Catholic church in Siena at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to do some emotional stuff in terms of my mother, I spent my life around, and I suppose you could, in a sense, if I wasn't a thinking person, I would have said that was a religious experience. It was a deep emotional. It wasn't actually. It was just the context in which I contacted, if you like, my mother, if you like, what was my real life.
well, a lot of our languages, of course, evolved from the religious connotations. So even though you can use words like spiritual or even religion in regard to an atheist's general experiences with emotion or with a desire for a moment of peace or a desire to talk out their issues, and it's just our language hasn't got enough space not to have baggage behind it.
Of course, yeah,
You know.
of course. Exactly.
So we shouldn't feel overly guilty in that regard, because it is, after all, part of our culture that we grew up in, and instead of bashing ourselves over the head every time we utter the word faith or something like that, we should just simply accept that that was our legacy, and it doesn't necessarily have the same meaning to us as it would have to other people, and that's enough.
It is interesting. I mean, language is important. Funny enough, again, going back to the Scientology context, you'll find that the language is seriously manipulated in Scientology. There is words for stuff that you wouldn't believe. You do not say to, for instance, if you've got a girlfriend and boyfriend, which you're not in Scientology, cowdrives, and you're certainly not allowed to have sex before you're married. It's very difficult to get married, so it's a bit frustrating. But if you love somebody, the word love is not used. It's called, what you actually say is to your girlfriend or friend, is I have very high ARC for you.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I have very high ARC for you.
What does that mean exactly? What's
Okay,
ARC?
well, we should try to break that down. Okay, the Scientology indoctrinates with a number of I suppose, brutal, simple concepts as you go in, right? It's not nuanced. There's no subtlety involved in this stuff, right? You come to Scientology and you are very rapidly taught that the education you've had is crap, right? Everything you know about love, relationship, language, study is crap, absolutely rubbish. They don't know the universities don't know what they're talking about, you know. Teachers don't know what they're talking about. It's all based on fallacy and ignorance, right? So here we have the Scientology system. And you're taught that you can't communicate unless you've done the Scientology communications courses, right? So Hubbard breaks down communication into 3 parts, I think it is. I remember this now, it's good kind of listed for me now. Yes, the 3 key parts are fundamentals to communication. Affinity, reality, communication.
Affinity?
Affinity?
Affinity, affinity.
Reality, communication. In order to communicate properly, all those 3 components have to be there in the conversation with the group or whatever else, okay? And the words are sort of self-explanatory, I suppose, really. Affinity is affinity. Affinity is a sense of connectedness with something, right? Reality, well, you have to agree on some reality is you have to agree upon that certain frameworks or whatever else. And I'm saying an awful lot better than Hubbard said, by the way. Communication, obviously communication. Communication, Hubbard describes communication as throwing a ball to someone and the ball coming back. That's his idea of communication. All right. So obviously, you know, the stuff that you had learned before is all broken down. It's all trash. And this is the model that we use. So for love, you have the feeling of affinity. You have a feeling of affinity, right? This is broken down to the term ARC, the acronym. Scientology uses acronyms all the time. KSW, keeping Scientology working. It's all acronyms all the time. So it's ARC, affinity, reality, communication. And high, in other words, this can be an ascending scale or a declining scale depending on circumstances. High ARC for you. Now that's sexy, you'll get someone to bed.
I suppose that most religions use that kind of attitude along the lines of having secret words, handshakes, rituals, and this gives them a sense of isolating themselves from the nuns that are not part of their group, and they can identify who is and who isn't by knowing the secret knowledge, much like the Gnostics would have had.
In Scientology, actually, if you control the language in Scientology, it's such a tightly controlled. Every Scientology is very, very tightly controlled, and his language is changed. So, and that acts as a manipulative technique, in fact, actually to manipulate the person. After a very short time in Scientology, believe me, I mean, they actually could come in quite crashing, you know, even, I mean, they're not all complete, messed up wonderful people necessarily. Some of them, and don't ask me why, I cannot understand why some people get Scientology. Perfectly intelligent, successful people, seem to get Scientology. Wholesale thing. But even after a couple of months of being in Scientology, they really can't talk to normal people anymore. They really can't. Because it's very intense, and the pressure is on the person constantly. I mean, unbelievable pressure. If you became a Scientologist, a little centre in Dublin, right, just to give a concrete example. So if you got recruited off the street in Scientology Dublin, you're a bit depressed, whatever else, I don't know, and you bought into it somehow. You said, oh wow, yeah, okay, maybe this is it. You pick up Hubbard's pseudoscience book, the one that you mentioned there, Dianetics. It's terrible. Even me in Scientology, it took me, I didn't get it, first of all. I just, what was he talking about? Quite violent, bloody book, in fact, and yet it's supposed to be the, what was it, Modern Science of Mental Health. It's supposed to be this is going to replace psychiatry, it's going to replace psychology, this is it. And it's desperate stuff, it really is. Actually, I read it when I was in prison in Africa, actually, to be honest with you. That was the first time I actually read the book, so I've diverted them. What was I saying? Language? Language, sorry, yes. Yeah.
You're saying that it's more than just a normal religious attitude.
So if you get into Scientology, that was it. If you get into Scientology, in the Mission of Dublin, let's say you buy into the idea, oh wow, I need this Scientology counselling in order to get over my depression, breakup, whatever it is, okay? You bang down your, you bang down $5 grand for your first bit of auditing. You run through that. Then you'll be called in to do a course, a course along with this, right? So fine, okay, good looking. But when on Saturday mornings, you do a course, whatever it is, right? They say, no, look, you need to get through this course an awful lot quicker than that. It's really, really important that you do that. And so you find yourself there every evening, every single evening, right? You bang down your next wad of cash, you mortgage the house, what do you do? You sell the cash, what do you do in order to buy the next level? And all of a sudden you're broke, right? She said, oh gosh, well you need this next level. Why don't you join staff, and if you work for blah blah hours, we can get you get you this as part of your staff contract. So you leave your job, step down, you're doing that, you're on staff, and you're doing courses at night. All of a sudden you are not in contact with the real world anymore. You don't go to the pub, you don't have time to go to the pub. Because you're being called, you need to go on your course now, or we need you on your job now. It's completely invasive. I mean, 24 hours a day, literally, 24 hours a day.
You talk about...
Do they live in communities, or do they just carry on in their normal lives?
Okay, Scientology breaks down into a number of different groupings. This would be the best way to explain it, right? You have the public Scientologists, right? So the guy, to some degree, guy or girl or man or woman or family who actually have a relatively normal life, right? And let's say they have to, bills, whatever else, right? Or the cash cows for Scientology, whatever. So they go and they will do Scientology services. Then you have a staff member. Staff member then is a very, very, in a city office, if you like, a city centre place. They tend to be former publics, and then they're working on the staff thing. And
are they getting paid?
To be a staff member, the finances work in terms of this. It's a percentage of the income that week. That's how it works. So if there's a big sale that week, let's say it's 30 grand, so we'll give you a breakdown of it. It's 30 grand that week, 4 grand will stay in the organisation itself, the rest will disappear. Obviously, very, very complicated systems that came out eventually. But that 4 grand, then you have to fund electricity, water, whatever else you've got to do, and pay wages. So it can be pretty, but they can sell books and get commission from selling books, and so they sell very aggressively for that reason. That's that. Then the next level is a group called the Sea Organization, which I was involved in, and this is they call it the elite of Scientology. This is a kind of a semi quasi-military group. We wear military uniforms, actually Navy uniforms. We live communally. We do not associate with public directly except for business. and we are on call 24 hours a day. We actually work on your job, normally say from 8, 9 in the morning. You're lucky to get home at midnight. You're lucky to get home at midnight. 7 days a week.
But you did actually mix with people outside when
My
you
job,
were
the
troubleshooting.
different jobs that I did required that I do that.
Just when you were writing the book and the articles and things when that was going to be published, was there a danger element there for you? Because I know that they went to the 100 people to bring them back.
There was, you know, but look, I've been 25 years in the cult. I was 45 years old at that time. I had nothing. I had nothing to lose. Fuck you guys, I have nothing to lose, right? You can sue me, you can do whatever you want, right? You can slash cars, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I'm telling my story. If I had a family and the job and whatever else, you know, it would have been a different story. It would have been a lot more cautious.
Do they use fear a lot with people in terms of, because I know you said that you had to raise $1 million to pay off somebody.
Right.
But do they generally just go that route and pay somebody off, or do they ever kind of fear monger?
It depends, you know. The Scientology throws a lot of money at problems like that. They hire, particularly a lot in England too, they hire good crack to look after. They buy the most expensive litigation they can possibly buy. They pay a lot of money, a huge, crazy, unbelievable amount of money to legally harass people, to make people too scared, to make, with a book, you know, an example of that is with a book. Published this in Ireland, Carter Rock in England, which is a libel firm, tried to get us based on libel in Ireland. It's still in Ireland, you can't do anything in Ireland. But Carter Rock in England sends a letter to every single book chain and every single publisher in the UK. If you take on this book, we are going to break you. And they send letters and international and stuff like that. So, you know, that level of intimidation. The other level of intimidations are, you know, you wake up in the morning, your tires are slashed. You wake up, your cat's hanging up on the, you know. You know, so you know, whatever is appropriate.
It's not a direct mandate from Hubbard. I saw a documentary where he's talking about utterly and completely destroying anyone that gets in their way.
Destroy the person. Yeah, literally destroy the person. Yeah. There's so many. There's horror stories around. Google Paulette Cooper, Google.
And as far as murder?
Alleged. Yeah.
Suicide.
If you have mysteriously done.
I mean, if some of them are working for pretty much slave labour, and they end up, for health reasons, they can, I suppose, go down the road, and if they're depressed enough, suicide is certainly not unheard of, and especially if they're isolated from their families. You hear that as well, where you have young women who die, not necessarily from direct murder, but are poorly looked after.
Suicide and attempted suicide. We'll give a case in point on that one. Again, just a bit of an insight into the culture, you know. You've got to toe the line. If you don't toe the line within, in this case, in the Sea Org, you have a problem. You're not allowed to leave the Sea organisation, right? So what we do is set up a re-education camp called the Rehabilitation Project Force, and it is a vicious routine. Young friend of mine actually had an affair, and this is illegal, had an affair and slept with a man she found very attractive. She was put on the Rehabilitation Project Force. She was angry, she was depressed. She demanded to be let to go, to go in this awful regime. So she found out what she could do was attempt to kill herself. So she ran out of the Indoctrination, one campus presenting program in Sussex. Great bottle paint there, threw it down, ran up a little bit, jumped off. She didn't die, unfortunately. She didn't die, but she was crippled and obviously lower bowels and intestines removed and all that kind of thing. Covered up by Scientology, covered up completely. They took up people in the health services and the social certificate.
Are women given a harder time in Scientology?
Not necessarily, no.
Sorry, what was the question?
Are women given a harder time?
Well, women are more complex creatures than that, aren't they? You know, I think we're a lot smarter than that, actually a lot more perceptive than men, and thus, to that degree, it is harder. The very fact that the woman carries a child is obviously a problem as well. So, signs are set up under a masculine structure of Hubbard, and the expectancy is the woman lives and follows the exact regime of the male. You know what I mean? There's not much thought taken into the fact that the woman has periods and stuff like that, so there's no money that way. And she can't buy, pads. That's her problem, you know what I mean? So there's not allowances made for or pregnant women. They don't allow children in the Sea Org anymore. They don't the Sea Org members to go, so what they do is they manipulate the women to have abortions.
CR is, which level CR now?
Huh?
What women aren't allowed, what level?
In the Sea Org level, women are not allowed to have children. So this would be the militant men. Again, sorry, I should just clarify very quickly. The organisation owns Scientology, owns all the property, owns all the licenses, owns all the deeds to every single building in Scientology, or anything that is valuable. The Sea organisation owns it, and the Sea organisation is what manages and runs Scientology. We are the people who do it. We are the people who do it. The staff member in, say, the city opposite, Birmingham, London, whatever else, he's just a flunky there in that city. He doesn't own it. That's it. So in other words, so Sea Org is the elite cadre that runs it, right? This is apropos, just kind of giving you a framework in terms of what we exist within and what Sea Org actually does.
Yeah.
So within that context, you're allowed to get married. In the Sea Org, you're allowed to get married. You're not allowed to have affairs. Sex is a very, very repressed subject.
Do you have to marry somebody within? Or can you marry
I marry people within the Sea organisation only. And now it's extremely difficult. I mean, I found that I was engaged twice. They don't like people to get married, especially the very use of flexible troubleshooters, you know. The first time I was engaged, I found myself in Africa. The second time I was engaged, I found myself in America.
It's a unit.
2 to 3 years at a time.
Two people kind of separate together.
What sort of educational options do they approve of for children of Scientology parents?
Yes. The only reason they have a school at all, the only reason they have a school, the child is not considered a child by the way. Again, you see that piece of very, very nasty Hubbard belief that that's connected.
Sorry, you believe what?
It's an awful piece of Scientology belief in regards to children. Children are considered to be adults in small bodies. That's what a child is. So there's no concept of neurological development, stages of development of a child. This doesn't exist because the idea that you are a Satan, as you call it, you live for millions and billions of years. You know what I mean? So, and you've taken this human body, this baby's body, you have taken it. So you're a fully formed adult in the Scientology concept. So there's no allowances done for that. The only reason we have schools is because society that would be it. It would just close them down if they didn't allow the children.
So they go to special schools?
They have their own schools now. Yeah, they used to, for a while they were going to, when I started, kids were actually going to local government schools and so, normal schools, state schools, whatever. But of course, there was, often the kids would, more often than not, the kids were terribly neglected. Clothing was pretty obvious the kids had problems in their thinking. They were disturbed because they see their children, see their parents for about an hour a week in most cases. So you can imagine so for kids, they were really damaged children. So this caused an awful lot. So teachers would say, hang on a second, we need to investigate what's happening with these children. We've driven up here in this beautiful minibus every day. We don't see them with the parents. They're hungry often. They're dirty. Licensing, whatever else. Awful. So this was causing such public relations flaps that they set up their own school. And they did set up a school system that the inspectorates would recognise. So essentially they did the curriculum, but it was infused with Scientology stuff. But they did enough of the curriculum that satisfied the education inspectorates and got them. So that's kind of.
It seems to me fairly outrageous that they could do that. I mean, they could satisfy the educational authorities.
Yeah. It's not, there's something else I was reading. We knew from the outset in this organisation that we had infiltrated people at local and state level in government. In fact, what I was doing, I was in Birmingham. I was infiltrating myself into that one. I mean, this is part of the strategy. That case with the IRS. Initially, the FBI actually almost closed down Scientology in the 70s. But the senior people in the FBI had been infiltrated and were sleeper agents within the FBI, not to mention FDA, IRS, a whole lot. This is a strategy. So yes, it is completely outrageous. I mean, I have a friend who, very good friend who got out, and she was in trying to get out. No, this was this was it. There's a couple of girls I knew very, very well from the time. One was a child, right? At the age of, I think she was 14, and her whole family had joined this organisation, whole family. So 14-year-old child, 14-year-old people rebel. She was a 14-year-old girl whose life had been completely destroyed by this awful cult, and yet their parents were in there believing it and living it, rebelled very, very hard. She lived and existed in the CR context, and they said, you're too much trouble, we're going to get rid of you. So they took her up one night, put her on that train to London, 14 quid, no passport, bye. She went to the local council, someone got the local council, referred the case straight back to St. Nelson. This is one of your people. The little girl came here. She came for help. She went there for help. So obviously the people they had in there grabbed the case very, very quickly and referred straight back to Scientology.
What's the overall goal of Scientology in terms of their long-term agenda? I mean, you have other religions who have their belief in a Messiah coming and all this, various reasons for world conquest to one degree or another. But since, there is no necessary Messiah from Scientology, I believe. So what exactly is its ambition, except for making money all the time? Does it have a global view?
Yeah, it has a global agenda, if you like. It's two agendas. One is a public agenda, that Scientology accepted worldwide, or whatever else, right? The actual agenda, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it was essentially Scientology is going to run governments, internationally. That's an agenda. Now, there's a lot of crap really when you actually break it down. It's not going to happen. They know it's not going to happen. But it's such a money spin. Scientology is such a money spin
And the people at the top believe it, or the people at the top just manipulating the people underneath?
Well, there's only one person at the top now. I mean, there's a bit of kind of a sort of a kind of a Stalinist coup almost, happened there. This guy David Miscavige, who's kind of, like I said, he is a psychodog. I mean, that's the guy. He is an absolute raving sociopath, this guy. But within that in the context of Scientology, he's very, very clever, but he's violent. He's got no sense of morality. Nothing. And there was, I think, 100 top executives. Hubbard at least understood, Hubbard understood that, if you run the leash properly with a person, with a senior executive, give him accolades, whatever, it doesn't matter, give him something. Keep him on the leash and let him use his intelligence and his power and so on to grow the organization. So they had a proper structure, I suppose, a proper corporate structure at one point. Miscavige kind of got...
What's his name?
His name is Miscavige, David Miscavige.
It's a strange name, David Miscavige.
Yeah, it's I think probably call it. But yeah, he took all the top executives and held them, and has held them. They're probably still being held there now. This has been, I think, 8 years now. They've been held in a thing called the Hold, kind of a communal prison cell, where they literally the fighting for their own individual personal survival. But that survival is related to pleasing Miscavige, essentially. So it's a case of David Cook gave, she actually made a deposition once she got out, that she had been stood up in a bin, been hazed, she's a lesbian, been beaten, had her fingers broken, and this kind of stuff. This actually, I'm sorry, this is not fiction, this is actually happening, this is happening right now. Physically tortured, by the group of people who were also being physically tortured by each other. This is, I don't know how to
It
describe
sounds as
it.
if they're almost incapable of thinking.
Well, they're completely destroyed. They're broken people. I mean, these people are broken people. And I've had an outbreak. Actually, knew a lot of those executives, and some actually quite.
And self-survival. The only way I can survive is to hurt somebody else.
Yeah. Oh, and this is. I'm going to make no bones about it. This is one evil organization that should not be existing. It should not be allowed to exist. I'm sorry, but there's a thing called cultural relativism, and that is a very powerful. And there's a thing called cowardice, and there's a thing called I'll look the other way. I just can't risk my political career on this. But this is just. I'm sorry. This organization. It is nasty. It is evil. It's Al-Qaeda's puppies compared to these guys. I'm sorry.
We'll take just 2 more questions, I think, and then we'll wrap it up. John will be upstairs in the key hall having lunch if people want to pop over and have a chat or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. No, if you do. I'm sorry. By the way, I brought one of the books here. I sell them for £5 a shot with discussions like this. Special deal today, only you get 2 for £10. So, by all means, you can buy that. It's the 2008 version. It's just been covers the period up to then. So there we go.
If someone wanted to infiltrate the organisation, and it's just they know they had access to resources, they were critical thinking, they had the ability to pass as a recruit, but without the actual vulnerability and stuff, how confident would you be that they could go in, climb through the levels and actually come out?
I've seen it before. Really back when I was infiltrating the organisation. He lasted about 3 months before he was rumbled. Scientologists are really. If you join Scientology, you are investigated. How they do this, different ways of doing this. Some of the guys in more arcane levels of the organisation do this, but they find everything about you: friends, family, lovers, education, weird teachers or your, anybody who's on it is scary the degree that they will dig in to find out who the person is.
If you passed, just say you passed all the...
If you did pass, could you do it? Okay, you could, but you would have to go in from the very, very start, and you would have to learn to speak the language very, very quickly. The language is important, and the thought process is important. The people who are not Scientologists within the Scientology, who are in becoming Scientology, they stand out a mile. They're like red lights, I've seen it. I've seen guys try. They stand out because Scientologists are kind of, if you like, stamped in a certain way. So they are a certain way, they think a way, they talk a certain way, their worldview is a very specific way. And so you can imagine going to a mosque in Tunisia, if you went in there as a Christian, or I went and infiltrate the mosque, there's an awful steep learning curve you have to do in order to be able to be taken as a brother Muslim, That's it.
To do they say that they tend to target vulnerable people, etc., and it's mostly people coming to them.
Yes.
So do they ever set up things like a book club under false pretenses to try and get people to come in and then work through and see who is vulnerable and then bring them to another level?
Yeah, not necessarily, not directly. They tend to, the individual recruitment of the prospective Scientologists is not a straightforward thing. They do events and big tours and all this kind of stuff. A lot of the front groups that they do have, which is an awful lot, by the way, I work in Belgium actually on a thing called Youth for Human Rights. It sounds wonderful, absolutely wonderful. It's a beautiful thing, it's a beautiful video, a whole bloody lot. But it's a Scientology PR front. It's more important for them to have PR fronts than, if you like, direct recruitment fronts. And so it's an awful lot of groups just say, what's that on campus the other day? Something like religious freedom without frontiers, something like that, or rights without frontiers, something like that. It sounds great.
How would you figure out if it is a Scientology PR group? How would one investigate that, or how would one?
How do you find out? Well, it was like, hopefully. I mean, I remember in Birmingham. I'll give an example of how you would. In Birmingham, one of the programs I was using with the Muslim youth groups and the Newtown system, which were Afro-Caribbeans, was Youth for Human Rights, which is very glossy, youth-oriented thing, right? That even took bits out of the Church of Human Rights Act in front of me there. And yet in there, there's whole sections that, great, admirable people to set up as role models, right? Einstein, Martin Luther King, L. Ron Hubbard, pretty quick that. One of the MPs that I was really trying to get on board, very intelligent lady, I really wanted to, was very active in education, very active in child literacy and STEM. And she was initially really liked what we were doing. Then also she was called on help. She did the research. She was like, down to Youth for Human Rights, that was slaves. Hang on, they're all Scientologists. Scientologists. Yeah. That was it. And she was getting the hell out of here. So yeah, very slick PR, but you've got to look. I mean, it's like anything, you've got to look. So. Last questions?
Well, listen,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you.